This is Warren Sprouse. You're on the Bible Forum. We're here every Sunday night from 8 to 10 p.m. Eastern. We'd love for you to join us, but if you can't, you can check us out during the week from the website or from the Facebook page or whatever. Sign up. We're looking at tribulation news. You know, tribulation, that event that's going to take place at the end of the age. Well, France had their election, their runoff election this week. According to published reports, Europe has heaved a sigh of corporate relief because the French voters overwhelmingly pulled the lever for Emmanuel Macron. Now, you don't really know who he is. I don't either. He just popped up, as it were. But France's wildly unpredictable and anti-establishment election season indicates that this is a country which is unstable and which is uncertain of its future and is beset by the same populist fervor sweeping the rest of the continent. The overarching issue was not on the ballot, and that issue is, will France stay in the European Union? And with Macron as president, that's more likely than not. He was sworn in today. They don't fool around. Emmanuel Macron is a former government appointee who has never held elective office. He won the runoff election in France by 66% to 34% to become, at 39, the country's youngest president. So what does it mean? Well, to the many who fear the far right, anti-European Union Le Pen, it might appear that disaster has been averted. And it has, for now. However, France's unpredictable and anti-establishment election season indicates a country that is A, unstable, B, unsure of its future, and C, beset by the same populist fervor sweeping the rest of the continent. The original election showed Le Pen taking more than half the country. The runoff showed her taking only 2 small northern districts. That's a big shift. So France now has a president that's going to keep them in the European Union, and he's going to continue the liberal focus. He said that a new page was being turned in French history. I want it to be a page of hope and renewed trust. Now, French elections in recent decades have followed along the 2 traditional main left-wing and right-wing parties. But this is a clear departure. Macron said, "I heard the rage, anxiety, and doubt a lot of you have expressed." And he vowed to spend his 5 years in office fighting the forces of division that undermine France. He said he would guarantee the unity of the nation and defend and protect Europe. What does that mean? It means that France is going to stay in the European Union. It means that France is going to stay and become more liberal. It means that France is consequently going to become more dangerous to live in, given her willingness to take in these Islamic refugees, so-called. Just this week it was reported fairly often how that the French people have no idea how truly dangerous their country is. The random, vicious attacks by Muslim refugees, so-called, is an almost everyday reality in American news. In France, they neither see nor hear of them, at least not at all the way we do. We hear the news, we see the pictures, the horrific attacks, we see the fallout, we hear all that goes on. They apparently don't get that. So what's all that do to public opinion? What does that do to their safety? Well, it makes their world more dangerous, simply because they don't know how to make a wise decision. They don't have enough information. So what are the implications biblically? Well, France is a key player in the European Union. Until World War II, France was the dominant force in European affairs. Great Britain, a traditional enemy, was not considered European. Germany, now the stabilizing force in European affairs, was the outlier, academically and religiously dominant but politically unstable. As an aside, it was German liberalism of the mid-1800s that infected Christianity, producing the nonsense we see in most of our churches today. Today, the European Union is staggering under the economic pressures of their weak alliances and foolish initiatives. Germany is bankrolling the European Union and consequently dominating in the decisions. Many EU member nations are struggling. Italy, Greece, Spain, Portugal, Switzerland, Ireland. All of them are under tremendous financial burden. And you might throw Italy in there too. Norway and Switzerland are not members, but they are dominated by the European Union. The Baltic states are European Union members, but they are currently living in fear of Russian invasion, and they don't seem to be getting a lot of help. The European Union has tied themselves to the ancient mythology of Lady Europa. Europa was the daughter of King Phoenicia. You've heard of the Phoenicians? Over on the eastern Med coast by Syria and Lebanon and Israel. Europa was enticed to sit upon a beautiful and gracious white bull. The bull was actually Zeus in disguise. Zeus from Greece, Europe. Europa from the Middle East, Ottoman Empire. Zeus had purposely lured Europa to himself when she sat upon his back. He sprang up, jumped into the sea, carrying her far away. Now Zeus was the Greek thunder god. Europa, a Phoenician, Syrian princess. In mythology, this event is pictured in a statue outside the European Union building in Brussels. At the rear of this statue is a bull with a woman who sits on him. At the rear of this statue are 10 glass rings, huge things that pile one on top of the other, seemingly unrelated to anything that statue is talking about or anything that concerns the European Union. Because there were 6 founding countries and later 12 core countries. The number 10 has nothing to do with the European Union. But the number 10 has a lot to do in what the Bible indicates is the final Western Confederation. Recently, the United Nations cultural body passed the latest in a series of resolutions that denies Israeli claims to Jerusalem. Submitted to UNESCO's executive board by Algeria, Egypt, Lebanon, Morocco, Oman, Qatar, and Sudan, the resolution is entitled Occupied Palestine and indicates Israel has no legal or historical rights anywhere in Jerusalem. That they have been traditionally there for well over 1,000 years before they were dispersed doesn't really count. That David bought the land upon which the temple was built has got nothing to do with anything. The vote in the United Nations was expected to pass unanimously. It coincided with Israel's Independence Day, but it was passed only by 22 countries. 33 other countries either abstained or were in opposition. 3 weren't there. The resolution rejected the Jewish state's sovereignty regarding any part of Jerusalem. It is referred to throughout the document as the occupying power in Jerusalem, indicating that it has no legal or historical ties to any part of that city. The 10 countries that voted against the resolution were the United States, the UK, Italy, the Netherlands, Lithuania, Greece, Paraguay, Ukraine, Togo, and Germany. In the mythological story, Europa's family and Zeus's family came from different parts of the Mediterranean community. It seems to foreshadow the conflict the Middle East has with Europe, Europe being the mother of Western Hemisphere nations. Which brings us to Turkey, Saudi Arabia, and Babylon the Great. A recent Times of Israel article with a byline, Istanbul, Turkey, says that Turkish President Erdogan, I don't know how to pronounce, how do they pronounce that? Erdogan, on Monday, that was last Monday, urged Muslims to throng to the Temple Mount in a show of solidarity with Palestinians as he issued a string of challenges to Israel, a nation which he called racist and discriminatory. What's going on? He was speaking at the opening ceremony of the International Forum on what Muslims call the Temple Mount, being held in Istanbul, Turkey. His sentiment underlines Islam's hatred of Jews and their very existence in Jerusalem. He said, quote, "Each day that Jerusalem is under occupation is an insult to us," end of quote. He also blasted efforts by the United States and Israel to move our embassy to Jerusalem, thus giving Jerusalem credibility as Israel's capital city. He called Israel's treatment of Palestinians racist and discriminatory, unlike what Muslims do to any non-Muslim across the world. Erdogan's strengthened hold over leadership in Turkey positions him as the inheritor of the Ottoman Empire. They just had an election. He was already in charge. They gave him more power. Observers claim he wants to revive that Ottoman Empire and eliminate Israel altogether. Well, into the fray walks Joel Richardson, an author of several religiously themed books, promoting his most recent, which is entitled Mystery Babylon. His thesis is that Mecca is actually biblical Mystery Babylon. Of course, the term seems more likely to define a system than an actual city. Uses the term mystery, but I digress. Richardson believes Turkey and Saudi Arabia will shape the Middle East in coming years. Turkey's a NATO nation, and Richardson contends that geopolitical analysts view it as being systematically transformed into an anti-Western power. We don't need a book to tell us that. We just need to watch. Others see Turkey slipping toward authoritarianism, revival of the Ottoman Empire, an empire that ruled the Middle East for 500 years before World War I. An empire that was broken up into the various nation-states that now dot the region, everything from Saudi Arabia and the Arab Emirates to Israel and Syria. An article in the New Yorker observes that Erdogan was once viewed as the reformer in the Islamic world, whom every leader in the West wanted to succeed. Now, however, he has essentially brought Turkish democracy to an end. Richardson's argument in his book is that Turkey and Iran are on a path to conflict, and that it will be Turkey who will eventually lead a coalition of Islamic nations against Israel. Despite the fact that Saudi Arabia and Turkey are currently working together to confront the Shiite power of Iran, Richardson argues conflict between the two powers is inevitable. Now, why would Turkey be in conflict with Saudi Arabia? Well, because, according to Erdogan, Saudi Arabia is simply a made-up kingdom with a made-up royalty. They have no history of ever being kings, and they just have oil now to give them credibility. As an aside, just this weekend there was news that the Saudi oil merchants are screaming bloody murder, and they want the U.S. to stop producing oil. It's ruining their economy. We have a president for 20 minutes, and all of a sudden we're producing more oil than anybody in the world. We could have been doing it all along. And we've got resources that's going to last hundreds and hundreds of years at any rate you can imagine. The Turks, the Saudis, the Sunnis, Turks and the Saudis are both Sunni Muslims, along with Egypt, while Iran is Shiite. They don't really like each other, but together they hate Israel. The enemy of my enemy is my enemy. Richardson believes Turkey will eventually conquer Iran. If that happens, we'll have a dominant Turkish Neo-Ottoman Empire. And the only roadblock to any of that is America. And it's for that reason that I think we'll see Turkey and all the nations that come under her sway eventually turn on Saudi Arabia, as the prophecy says, and devour her and burn her body with fire. Richardson said. Now, you have to understand, the scripture refers to Israel in Revelation 12, not Saudi Arabia. But Richardson believes Babylon the Great is primarily two things. It's a religious entity, corrupt and corrupting, and it's an economic influence. And he's right on that. Richardson continues, religiously speaking, Mecca is the greatest city of idolatry ever known. 1.26 billion people bowing 5 times a day toward the idol known as the Kaaba, with its black meteorite embedded into the corner, shrouded with a black shroud, very much the same way Muslim women are required to cover. You could look at various forms of worship that go on around the Kaaba and see clearly that it's dripping with paganism, he says. The whole practice of circumambulation throughout Hindu and Buddhist practices are not anything you see in the Bible. The very symbol of the crescent moon is rooted in pagan Midian. You can go back into the Bible when Gideon killed Zebah and Zalmunna, pagan Midianite kings. What were they wearing? They were wearing crescent moon symbols. Richardson further explained the famous passage in Isaiah 14, which refers to the morning star. He says it is often interpreted to be Lucifer as the crescent moon. There's no mention of morning star in Isaiah 14, but I don't know that that should interfere with the thought process. The only mention of it is in the book of Revelation in regard to Jesus. Just saying. Richardson points to the number of national flags featuring a crescent moon to support his point. He says they're everywhere. I found 10, mostly in Africa and Asia. He says Satan himself is referred to biblically by the crescent moon. I don't know where it's referred that way. It's certainly not in the Bible. I looked. No reference of it. Richardson concludes saying Islam is not simply just another false religion in a series. Islam is actually the mother of all false religion. It's the greatest numerically in terms of its impact. In human history, there's not been another false religion as large as Islam. But it is also in many ways that perfect antichrist, the perfect counterfeit religion, or the perfect foil, against which the words and works of God are compared. Now here's the point. France is now on a most liberal journey, having rejected what they consider to be conservative, although Le Pen was far from our definition of conservative. Joined up with Germany, the European Union probably has a slim chance of survival. Without France, almost none. Biblically, all this is important. For without a Western Confederation, the biblical prophecy falls destructively short. So what is this 10-nation Western Confederation? No one really knows. The white horse of Revelation is characterized as that which rides in to save Israel and bring order out of chaos. That chaos may actually be the result of the rapture. A chaos which motivates Turkey, Iran, and Russia, and who knows else, to assert themselves over one another and over Israel. Whatever it is, it doesn't work. Because in Revelation chapter 6, right behind that white horse comes a red horse of war and death. And then a black horse of economic collapse, which you would imagine after war and death. And finally, the pale horse of death and hell. Today, France will rejoice for a while, but then will come the violence of Islamists to a country without the necessary leadership to fight it off. We have seen liberal leadership in this country several times, and each time they don't seem to have a backbone. They want to play nice with everybody in the hopes that they'll play nice with us. Never works. Bullies don't understand that. Bullies only understand power. If you don't come at them with a significant amount of power and resolve, they just think you're weak and they'll keep bullying you. And then there's the economic pressure, which will have no solution given Macron's liberal views. In our country, we switched from an ultra-liberal to a conservative president. Nothing's changed. It's only been 3 months. We're already producing more oil than anybody in the world. Our stock market is on the rise. Our unemployment is at all-time lows. And businesses are investing and people are being hired. We haven't done anything yet. It's just the hope that somebody will be a man, stand up, take responsibility, and take charge. Liberals don't do that. But, positioned as she is, France, all this is going to spill over into other European countries. Germany's going to be hard-pressed to help. And the United States, we got a cowboy in the White House. We may very well see him as the rescuer. And then you know what may ensue. Or it could get better. We're clearly at the end. It's not going to get better. Not consistently better. It'll get a little better, and it'll get much worse. And it'll get a little better and much worse. We may be watching the last, it's getting a little better, that the United States ever has. Or Israel, for that matter. It's time to read the book of the Revelation, the book of Daniel. It's time to read your eschatology bone up. And it's time to pray for the peace of Israel.